There is a moment, and you may have already felt it, where something inside you goes quiet. Not the quiet of giving up, not the quiet of numbness. A different kind of quiet. The kind that arrives after a long storm, when the air changes pressure and the wind drops and everything around you is still wet and torn, but there is this unmistakable sense that the worst of it is behind you. You did not plan for this moment. You could not have manufactured it. And yet here you are, watching this, and something in your chest recognizes what I am about to say before I even say it. That recognition, that faint electrical hum of knowing, is not coincidence. It is confirmation. You have passed through something that most people are still standing at the edge of, still circling, still negotiating with. And the fact that you are here, in this exact frame of attention, tells me more about where you are in your own unfolding than any test or metric ever could. But I want to be careful with you, because the idea that you have passed some kind of cosmic test can land in two very different places inside a person. It can land in the ego, where it becomes another trophy, another reason to feel special, another story about how you are more awake than the people around you. Or it can land deeper in the place that does not need trophies, the place that knows the test was never about proving anything to the universe. The test was about what you were willing to release, and the passing was not a reward. It was a consequence, a natural, inevitable consequence of something you stopped doing. That distinction matters. It matters more than almost anything else I could say in this video. So let us stay with it. Let us go slowly. Because what I want to show you is not just that you have crossed a threshold, but what the threshold actually was, how it was constructed, why most people never cross it, and what changes in the physics of your lived experience once you do. Let me start with something that happened in a laboratory. In 1999, a team of researchers at the University of Vienna conducted a version of what is called the delayed choice experiment. The original concept was proposed by the physicist John Archibald Wheeler in the late 1970s, and it remains one of the most unsettling results in all of quantum mechanics. Here is the setup as simply as I can describe it. You send a photon, a single particle of light, toward a barrier with two slits. On the other side of the barrier is a detection screen. If you do not observe which slit the photon passes through, it behaves as a wave. It passes through both slits simultaneously and creates an interference pattern on the screen, the signature of a wave interacting with itself. But if you place a detector at one of the slits to observe which path the photon takes, the interference pattern vanishes. The photon behaves as a particle. It goes through one slit or the other, not both. That alone is strange enough, but Wheeler's delayed choice version adds a twist that borders on the impossible. In this version, the decision about whether to observe the photon's path is made after the photon has already passed through the slits. After. And yet the photon's behavior still conforms to the choice. If you decide to observe, the photon will have behaved as a particle. If you decide not to observe, it will have behaved as a wave. As though the photon knew, before the decision was made, what you were going to choose. As though the present moment reached backward and reorganized the past. Now, physicists will tell you correctly that this does not mean consciousness literally controls photons. The measurement problem is more subtle than that. But here is what the experiment does demonstrate. And this is not metaphor. This is the actual result. The act of looking changes what is there to be found. Not because looking creates reality in some magical sense, but because reality, at the most fundamental level, is not fixed until it is engaged with. The universe does not exist in a single definite state waiting to be discovered. It exists in a superposition of possibilities, and it is the act of engagement, of participation, of choosing to look, that collapses those possibilities into something specific. And there is something else Wheeler said that most people who cite this experiment leave out. He said that the universe is not a machine that runs whether or not anyone is watching. He called it a participatory universe. His exact phrasing was that we are not observers of the universe but participants in it, and that the very act of participation reaches back through time and gives substance to what we call the past. He was not speaking loosely. He was describing what the mathematics of quantum mechanics actually implies when you follow it without flinching. The universe requires a witness in order to become definite, and the witness is not separate from what is being witnessed. The witness and the witnessed are entangled, which is to say they are aspects of a single process that only appears to be two things when you look at it from inside the ordinary mind. Hold that, because the test you passed works on exactly this principle. For most of your life, you have been living inside a superposition of your own making. Multiple versions of yourself, multiple timelines, multiple possible futures, all coexisting in a blur. And that blur felt like confusion. It felt like being stuck. It felt like wanting something deeply, but never quite being able to reach it. As though the life you wanted was on the other side of glass you could see through but not break. What you did not realize for a long time was that the glass was not a barrier. It was a mirror, and the reason you could not break through was that you were still looking at your own reflection, still negotiating with the image, still trying to fix or improve or perfect the version of yourself you saw staring back. The test was never about becoming good enough to pass through. The test was about turning away from the mirror entirely. If this is resonating with something deep in you right now, take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to this channel so we can keep exploring these ideas together. Let me tell you what I mean by that, because it is not abstract. The philosopher and mystic Jiddu Krishnamurti spent decades pointing at something that most of his audiences found almost impossible to grasp. He said that the thinker and the thought are not two separate things. When you have a thought, there is not a you standing apart from the thought, observing it, and deciding whether to keep it. The thinker is the thought. The observer is the observed. This sounds like a riddle, but it is actually a precise description of how the mind constructs the illusion of separation. You believe there is a self who is having experiences, and that this self can step back, evaluate, and choose which experiences to keep. But Krishnamurti insisted, and decades of neuroscience have come to echo him, that the self who seems to be choosing is itself a product of the same process. There is no one standing outside the river. You are the river. Why does this matter for the test you passed? Because the final test, the one the universe does not announce, the one with no study guide and no deadline, is the test of whether you can stop trying to be the one who passes, whether you can release the entire architecture of self-improvement, self-optimization, self-monitoring, and simply be what remains when all of that falls away. Think about what most spiritual seeking actually looks like in practice. You read a book about presence and then you try to be present. You hear about surrender and then you try to surrender. You learn about the ego and then you try to dissolve the ego. But who is trying? Who is the one efforting toward egolessness? It is the ego itself wearing a spiritual costume, performing its own dissolution as the latest project. This is not a failure of character. It is the fundamental trap. And nearly everyone who walks a conscious path gets caught in it, most for years, some for entire lifetimes. The test you passed was the moment you stopped trying to pass. And I know how paradoxical that sounds. So let me ground it in something you can feel. Think about the last time you truly let go of something. Not the times you said you let go while secretly still gripping. Not the times you performed detachment while your stomach was in knots. The real time. The time when something you had been holding, a relationship, a belief about yourself, a need for a specific outcome, simply fell from your hands the way a leaf falls from a branch. Not because you decided to drop it, because it was ready. Because you were ready. Because the season had changed inside you and the attachment had completed its cycle and there was nothing left to hold. That moment, that precise moment, that was the test. And the passing was not something you did. It was something that happened through you when you finally stopped doing. The people who shift fastest are not the ones who try the hardest. They are the ones who finally see the one thing they could not see before. There is something underneath all of it, quietly running the show. I am hosting a free live transmission where I walk you through exactly what that is and how to finally shift it at the root. The link to register is in the description below. Save your seat. The moment you see this, you will understand why you could not see it before. I want to ask you something. What was the thing you finally released? What was the identity or the belief that fell away when you stopped gripping? Tell me in the comments, because I think there is something powerful about naming it, about letting it exist outside of you in words. There is a concept in thermodynamics called entropy, and it is usually described as the tendency of systems to move toward disorder. But there is a more nuanced way to understand it. Entropy is not chaos. Entropy is the universe's movement toward the most probable state. A deck of cards in perfect order is improbable. A deck of cards shuffled randomly is probable. So systems move from improbable arrangements toward probable ones. Not because disorder is a force, but because there are overwhelmingly more ways to be disordered than ordered. Now here is where this gets interesting for what you have been through. Your old identity, the one you constructed over years, the one built from other people's expectations and your own compensatory strategies and the wounds you organized your personality around. That identity was a low entropy state. It was highly ordered, highly maintained, and deeply improbable. It took enormous energy to sustain. Every day you woke up and unconsciously rebuilt the scaffolding of who you thought you were. You reminded yourself of your story. You reinforced your beliefs. You performed your role. And all of that maintenance created a kind of psychic friction, a constant low-level exhaustion that you probably mistook for just being tired or just being human. The test was the moment the maintenance became unsustainable. The moment the energy required to keep holding the old shape exceeded the energy you had available. And instead of panicking, instead of scrambling to rebuild, instead of finding a new and better mask, you let the structure come apart. You let entropy do what entropy does. You allowed yourself to move toward a more natural state. Not a state of chaos, a state of probability, a state of coherence with what you actually are rather than what you were trying to be. And here is what nobody tells you about that transition. It does not feel like victory. It feels like dying. It feels like the ground opening beneath you. It feels like everything you built your identity on turning to sand. There is grief in it. There is terror. There is a profound disorientation, because when you release the self you have been performing, there is a gap before the deeper self emerges, and in that gap, you are no one. You are nothing. You are the space between the old wave function and the new one, the moment after collapse and before the next possibility crystallizes. If you are watching this, you survived that gap. You sat in the nothing and you did not run. That is what passed. Not you. The gap passed through you and you let it. Let me take you somewhere else now, into the body. Because the body knows things about this process that the mind cannot articulate. There is a structure in your brainstem called the reticular activating system, and its job is to filter the roughly 11 million bits of sensory information your nervous system receives every second, down to the roughly 50 bits your conscious mind can actually process. 50 out of 11 million. That means your experience of reality is not a window, it is a keyhole. And the shape of that keyhole is determined by what you believe is important, what you believe is threatening, and what you believe is possible. When you were living inside your old identity, your reticular activating system was calibrated to that identity. It filtered for evidence that confirmed your story. If your story was that the world is unsafe, your RAS showed you danger everywhere. If your story was that you are not enough, your RAS highlighted every rejection, every sideways glance, every moment of exclusion, and quietly deleted the evidence of your belonging. You were not seeing reality. You were seeing your beliefs about reality, reflected back to you through the most sophisticated confirmation bias machine ever evolved. The test, the real test, was whether you could tolerate the recalibration. Because when your old identity collapses, your reticular activating system loses its instructions. It does not know what to filter for anymore. And for a while, sometimes days, sometimes weeks, sometimes months, the world looks different. Not better, not worse. Different, unfamiliar. You notice things you never noticed. You miss things you used to catch automatically. People respond to you in ways that do not match your expectations. Synchronicities appear with an almost aggressive frequency, not because the universe is sending you signs, but because your filter has widened, and you are seeing connections that were always there but were previously deleted by your old programming. What is happening in those moments is not mystical in the supernatural sense. It is neurological in the deepest sense. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for prediction and pattern recognition, is running without its usual dataset. It was trained on your old identity's assumptions, and now those assumptions have dissolved, and so the prefrontal cortex is doing something it almost never gets to do. It is perceiving without predicting. It is taking in raw information before categorizing it. And that experience, that brief window of unmediated perception, is what mystics across every tradition have spent lifetimes trying to access through meditation, fasting, breathwork, and contemplative practice. You got there not through technique, but through collapse. The path was not the one anyone would have chosen, but it was the one that worked. This is where most people fail the test, by the way. Not in the collapse itself, but in the recalibration afterward. Because the disorientation of seeing without your old filter is so uncomfortable that the temptation to rebuild the filter is almost irresistible. To grab a new identity, to adopt a new story, to replace the old mask with a shinier one. Spiritual ego is the most common replacement. The person who used to define themselves by their wounds now defines themselves by their awakening. The content of the identity changed. The structure did not. You passed because you did not grab. You stayed in the openness. You tolerated the not knowing. You let the new filter calibrate itself organically, from the inside out, rather than imposing a new one from the outside in. If you are ready to take what we have just touched on deeper, listen up. Have you spent years chasing manifestation, visualizing, affirming, raising your vibration, only to watch the same patterns repeat? Every traditional method assumes the same thing, that you are separate from what you want. That separation was never real. You were chasing a signal you were already broadcasting. Beyond the frequencies, a quantum guide to consciousness mastery walks through all 9 frequencies, from the dense transmissions trapping you, through the ascending currents, to the master frequencies where consciousness becomes the field. Every method you tried sent a signal outward. This one tunes the signal you already are. Every day you delay, your nervous system broadcasts the same old signal, and breaking free gets harder. So move on it tonight. The link is in the pinned comment below. Now let us return to what this recalibration actually feels like from the inside. I want to talk about what that looks like in practice, because it has a texture that is very specific and very different from what most people imagine spiritual growth to feel like. It feels like boredom. Not the restless boredom of a mind that needs stimulation, but a deep, almost geological boredom. The boredom of a field in winter. Nothing is growing. Nothing is dying. The soil is just sitting there, doing nothing visible, while underneath, in the dark, microbial processes are breaking down the old roots and preparing the ground for whatever comes next. You cannot rush this phase. You cannot optimize it. You cannot even really participate in it consciously. You can only endure it. And the endurance is not dramatic. It is not heroic. It is the least cinematic spiritual experience imaginable. It is sitting in your living room on a Tuesday afternoon with no motivation, no inspiration, no clear sense of direction, and instead of interpreting that as depression or failure, simply allowing it to be what it is. Fallow ground. The pause between exhale and inhale. The fermata in the score. The Taoist tradition has a concept for this that is often mistranslated as doing nothing, Wu Wei. But Wu Wei does not mean passivity. It means non-forcing. It means acting in alignment with the natural flow of things rather than imposing your will against it. A river does not force its way through a canyon. It follows the path of least resistance. And over millions of years, it carves the Grand Canyon. The power is not in the forcing. The power is in the persistence of alignment. What you passed through was your own version of Wu Wei. The moment you stopped forcing your life into the shape you thought it should be and allowed it to find the shape it actually wants to take. And the reason this is the final test, the reason I am calling it that, is because every other test along the way was preparation for this one. Every challenge, every heartbreak, every dark night, every moment of doubt was teaching you one thing. How to let go of control without letting go of care. How to release your grip without losing your intention. How to surrender the how while still honoring the what. That is the paradox at the center of this entire journey. You have to want something deeply enough to align your whole being with it, and simultaneously hold it loosely enough that you are not strangling it. The Bhagavad Gita says it this way: you have a right to the action, but not to the fruit of the action. Act fully, invest completely, and then release the outcome. Not because the outcome does not matter, but because your attachment to a specific outcome is the very thing that prevents the optimal outcome from arriving. I am curious about something. During that fallow period, that deep boredom, what kept you from running back to the old pattern? What was the thread you held on to, or did you hold on to nothing at all? Share that in the comments, because someone else in this space needs to hear exactly what you went through. There is a direct parallel here to quantum mechanics, and it is not a loose metaphor. In quantum field theory, the vacuum state, what we think of as empty space, is not actually empty. It is seething with what physicists call zero-point energy, virtual particles flickering in and out of existence, borrowing energy from the vacuum and returning it so quickly that they never fully materialize. The vacuum is not nothing. It is everything in potential. It is the field of all possibilities before any one possibility is selected. Your fallow period, your boredom, your apparent emptiness, that was your vacuum state. And like the quantum vacuum, it was not empty. It was full of potential so dense that it could not yet take form. The form was waiting for your filter to finish recalibrating. It was waiting for your nervous system to stop flinching. It was waiting for the last residue of your old identity to compost into soil. And now, or soon, or already beginning in ways you can barely perceive, the virtual particles of your next chapter are starting to materialize. Let me say more about what zero-point energy actually is, because the physics here is genuinely strange, and the strangeness is the point. In classical physics, a system at absolute zero temperature, the coldest possible state, would have no energy at all. Everything would be perfectly still. But quantum mechanics forbids this. The Heisenberg uncertainty principle says that you cannot know both the position and the momentum of a particle with perfect precision simultaneously. If a particle were truly at rest, you would know both its position and its momentum exactly, which quantum mechanics says is impossible. So even at absolute zero, particles must still vibrate. They cannot stop. The universe will not allow perfect stillness at the quantum level, because perfect stillness would require a kind of certainty that quantum mechanics structurally prohibits. This irreducible vibration is zero-point energy. It is the minimum energy a system can have and still exist. It is the hum beneath the silence. It is what remains when everything that can be removed has been removed. And this is what you discovered in your fallow period, whether you named it this way or not. When you stripped away the performing and the striving and the maintaining, when you removed every layer of constructed identity, what remained was not nothing. What remained was vibration, a quiet, persistent aliveness that did not depend on any story or role or achievement to justify its existence. That aliveness is your zero-point energy. It is the minimum you, the irreducible you, the you that exists prior to every label and every narrative. And it turns out that this minimum you is not small. It is the foundation of everything else. Let me give you something to do with this understanding. Not a practice in the sense of a technique to master, but a way of paying attention that will help you integrate what has already shifted. For the next 7 days, I want you to notice the moments when you catch yourself reaching for your old story. You will know them by their flavor. They taste like justification. They sound like explaining yourself to someone who is not in the room. They feel like a tightening in the space between your shoulder blades, a bracing, as though you are preparing to defend a position. When you catch one of these moments, do not fight it. Do not try to stop the old story from arising. Simply notice the gap between the story and the noticing. There is a space there. It might be a fraction of a second. It might be barely perceptible. But it is there. And that space, that tiny interval between the old pattern firing and your awareness of it firing, that is the evidence of what you have passed through. That gap did not used to exist. The pattern and the identity were fused. There was no daylight between them. Now there is. And every time you notice the gap, it widens. Not because you are forcing it wider, because noticing is what widens it. Awareness is the mechanism. Observation changes the observed. This is not a metaphor borrowed from physics for poetic effect. This is the same principle operating at a different scale. In quantum mechanics, observation collapses the wave function. In your nervous system, awareness interrupts the automaticity of conditioned response. The mechanism is analogous because the underlying reality is unified. Consciousness is not separate from the physical world. Consciousness is what the physical world is doing when it becomes aware of itself. There is a specific quality to the awareness that widens the gap, and I want to name it precisely because it is easy to confuse with something that looks similar but functions differently. The awareness that widens the gap is not analytical. It is not the part of your mind that watches your thoughts in order to evaluate and correct them. That kind of watching is still the ego doing its job, still the maintenance crew trying to keep the old structure intact by monitoring which thoughts are acceptable and which need to be replaced. The awareness that widens the gap is more like peripheral vision than focused sight. It is the part of you that can be aware of a thought without being inside the thought. Neuroscientists sometimes call this metacognition, the capacity to think about thinking. But that framing still implies a thinker doing the thinking about thinking, which puts us back inside the loop. What I am pointing at is something prior to metacognition, a witnessing that is not a function of the mind, but a quality of consciousness itself, and you have already accessed it. Every time you caught yourself in the old pattern and felt even briefly that you were not identical to the pattern, that was it. That was the witness. That was the gap. That is what you are learning to inhabit more fully now. David Bohm, the physicist who worked with Einstein and later collaborated with Krishnamurti, proposed a model of reality he called the Implicate order. In Bohm's view, what we see as separate objects and events in the physical world are actually expressions of a deeper, enfolded reality where everything is interconnected. He used the analogy of a hologram. In a hologram, every part contains information about the whole. Cut a hologram in half, and you do not get half an image. You get the whole image at lower resolution. Bohm suggested that the universe works this way. Every point in space-time contains, in some enfolded sense, the entire universe. Bohm called what we ordinarily see the explicate order, the unfolded surface of things, the world of separate objects moving through time. And he called the deeper reality the implicate order, the enfolded wholeness from which the explicate world continuously emerges and into which it continuously returns. He described consciousness not as something that exists inside the brain, but as something that participates in the implicate order, something that is itself part of the enfolded wholeness rather than a product of it. The brain, in Bohm's view, is more like a receiver than a generator. It picks up and translates something that is already there in the deeper structure of reality. If this is true, and there is more mathematical support for it than most people realize, then the test you passed was not administered by something outside you. It was not the universe testing you the way a teacher tests a student, from a position of separation and authority. The test was the universe testing itself through you. You are not separate from the intelligence that designed the test. You are that intelligence, temporarily focused into a single point of awareness, going through the process of remembering what it already knows. And what it already knows, what you already know in the deepest stratum of your being, is that you were never broken. The whole journey, the years of struggle, the seeking, the trying, the failing, the dark nights, all of it was the universe doing what the universe does. Exploring itself, folding and unfolding, contracting into density and expanding back into spaciousness. You did not fail any of the earlier tests. You completed them. Each one taught your nervous system something it needed to learn. Each one recalibrated your filter by one more degree. Each one composted one more layer of false identity into usable soil. The final test was simply the last layer, the one closest to the bone, the one that felt like it would kill you to release because it was so deeply fused with your sense of self that letting it go felt identical to letting yourself go. And you let it go anyway. Not because you were brave, though you were. Not because you were ready, though you were. Because the season changed. Because the fruit was ripe. Because holding on became more painful than letting go, and your body, in its animal wisdom, chose the lesser pain. There is a phenomenon in psychology called post-traumatic growth, and it describes something that clinicians did not expect to find. After severe trauma, after the kind of experience that shatters a person's assumptions about the world, a significant percentage of people do not simply return to their previous baseline. They exceed it. They report greater appreciation for life, deeper relationships, increased personal strength, recognition of new possibilities, and spiritual development that they say could not have occurred without the shattering. Not despite the trauma, through it. The researchers who first documented this, Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun at the University of North Carolina, were careful to note something important. Post-traumatic growth does not come from the trauma itself. It comes from the cognitive and emotional processing that follows. The shattering creates the possibility. What you do in the silence after the shattering is what determines whether you grow or simply reconstitute the old shape. And this is precisely why most people who experience severe disruption do not undergo post-traumatic growth. They reconstitute. They rebuild the old identity as quickly as possible, because the gap is too terrifying to sit in, and they never discover what was available in the emptiness. You sat in the gap. You did not reconstitute. And that choice, or rather that non-choice, that willingness to not choose while the choosing mechanism itself was offline, is what made post-traumatic growth not just possible but inevitable. This is not a justification for suffering. It is not a claim that pain is good or necessary. It is an observation that the human system, when it is allowed to complete the full cycle of disruption and integration, does not merely heal, it reorganizes at a higher level of complexity, like a bone that breaks and heals stronger at the fracture point, like a forest that burns and regenerates with greater biodiversity than before. You are in the early stages of that reorganization right now. The fire has passed. The ground is black, and it smells like ash and loss. But if you look carefully, and I mean this literally, If you look at the actual texture of your daily experience right now rather than your thoughts about your daily experience, you will find green shoots. Small ones. Easy to miss if you are still scanning the horizon for the old landscape. A conversation that surprises you with its depth. A moment of spontaneous laughter that comes from somewhere below your usual emotional register. A decision that you make quickly and cleanly, without the usual agonizing, because something in you simply knows. These are not random. These are the first expressions of the new pattern, the new wave function beginning to take shape. And here is what I want you to understand about this new pattern, because it is fundamentally different from the old one in a way that changes everything. The old pattern was maintained from the outside in. It was a structure you built in response to external conditions. What your family needed you to be, what your culture rewarded, what your wounds demanded as compensation. It was a fortress, and like all fortresses, it kept things out, but it also kept you in. The new pattern is organizing from the inside out. It is not a structure you are building. It is a structure that is building itself, using you as its medium, the way a crystal organizes itself from a solution. You do not tell a crystal how to grow. You provide the conditions, the right temperature, the right saturation, the right stillness, and the crystal does what crystals do. It finds its own geometry. The geometry that crystals find is not arbitrary. It is not random. A crystal of sodium chloride always forms a cubic lattice. A crystal of quartz always forms a hexagonal prism. The geometry is encoded in the molecular structure of the substance itself. It is what the substance is, expressed in 3 dimensions, made visible by the conditions that allow it to form. Your new pattern works the same way. The geometry of who you actually are, beneath the fortress, beneath the performance, beneath the compensatory strategies. That geometry has been there the entire time. It was not created by the collapse. It was revealed by it. The conditions that allow it to become visible are exactly the conditions you are now in. The stillness, the openness, the willingness to not impose a shape from outside. Your job now is to provide the conditions, and the conditions are simpler than you think. Honesty, rest, attention. The willingness to feel what you feel without immediately converting it into a story about what you feel. The willingness to not know what is coming next, and to let that not knowing be spacious rather than terrifying. Consider sharing this video with someone you know who is in the middle of their own collapse right now. Someone who needs to hear that the disorientation is not a sign of failure, but of recalibration. When you share something like this, you are not just passing along information. You are extending the field of awareness itself, creating a resonance between your understanding and theirs that amplifies the integration for both of you. That is how consciousness works. It deepens by being shared. I want to return to the delayed choice experiment one more time, because there is a layer to it that I did not unpack earlier, and it is directly relevant to where you are right now. In Wheeler's version of the experiment, the decision about whether to observe is made after the photon has already traveled its path. And yet the photon's behavior conforms to the future decision. This has led some physicists, including Wheeler himself, to suggest that the universe is participatory, that the past is not fixed until it is observed from the present. That in some sense, the present moment reaches backward and determines which version of the past is real. Think about what that means for your own story. You have a past. It happened. The events are real. But the meaning of those events, the pattern they form, the story they tell, that is not fixed. It is being determined right now by how you observe it from this present moment. When you were inside your old identity, your past was a story of damage, of things that went wrong, of ways you were broken. From that vantage point, every memory was evidence for the prosecution. But from where you stand now, after the collapse, after the gap, after the recalibration, the same events are available for a different interpretation. Not a denial of what happened, a recontextualization. The pain was real, the struggle was real, and they were also the exact curriculum your consciousness needed in order to arrive at this moment of integration. This is not positive thinking. This is not pasting affirmations over wounds. This is the recognition that meaning is not embedded in events. Meaning is created by the relationship between the observer and the observed. Change the observer, and the meaning changes. Not because you are lying to yourself, but because a more complex observer can perceive more complex patterns. A child who falls off a bicycle sees only pain and failure. An adult who fell off a bicycle 1,000 times and eventually learned to ride sees the falling as part of the learning. The events did not change. The observer did. And the observer's complexity determines which pattern in the data becomes visible. You are a more complex observer now than you were before the test. And from this new vantage point, patterns that were invisible are becoming visible. Connections that seemed random are revealing their coherence. The scattered pieces of your life are not scattered. They are a hologram. And you are finally at the resolution where the image becomes clear. There is something specific that happens in the nervous system when the observer becomes more complex. And I want to name it because you have probably felt it without having a frame for it. Neuroscientists who study contemplative states describe a phenomenon called de-automatization. It was first documented by the psychiatrist Arthur Diekman in the 1960s, and it refers to the undoing of the automatic perceptual and cognitive habits that ordinarily structure experience. In ordinary consciousness, perception is heavily filtered and pre-interpreted. You do not see a chair. You see a concept of a chair, a symbol that your brain has learned to recognize and categorize so efficiently that the raw sensory data barely registers. De-automatization reverses this. The automatic filters loosen, perception becomes more direct, more vivid, more textured. Colors seem more saturated, sounds seem more present. Time seems to slow slightly, not because it actually slows, but because more information is being registered per second. This is what contemplatives describe as beginner's mind, the capacity to encounter the familiar as though for the first time. What you experienced in the gap, in the disorientation after the collapse, was a form of de-automatization. Your old perceptual filters had dissolved along with your old identity, and for a period you were perceiving more directly than you had in years, possibly ever. That is why the world looked strange. That is why synchronicities seemed to multiply. That is why certain conversations felt unusually significant. You were not imagining it. You were perceiving more. And now, as the new pattern begins to organize itself from the inside out, the question is whether you can retain some of that perceptual openness even as the new structure forms, whether the new filter can be more permeable than the old one, whether you can build a new home without building a new fortress. I want to offer you one more thing before we close. And it is not a practice or a technique. It is a permission. You have permission to stop proving that you have changed. You have permission to stop performing your growth for an audience, internal or external. You have permission to let the transformation be quiet, to let it be private, to let it be so subtle that no one around you can name what is different, even though they can feel it. The deepest changes do not announce themselves. They do not need to. A tree that has grown new roots does not display them. The roots are underground, invisible, doing their work in the dark. And the tree does not need anyone to see the roots in order for the roots to hold. You are held, not by a force outside you, by the same intelligence that holds electrons in their orbitals and planets in their orbits and galaxies in their spirals. The same intelligence that collapses wave functions and organizes crystals and turns acorns into oaks. That intelligence is not watching you from a distance, deciding whether you are worthy. That intelligence is you. It has always been you. The test was whether you could stop looking for it out there and recognize it in here. And you did. So here is what I want you to sit with as this video ends and the silence begins. You did not find this video. This video did not find you. There is no finding because there was never any distance. The seeker and the sought were always the same. The question and the answer were always the same. The test and the passing were always the same. You were the universe, folded into a single point of awareness, pretending to be lost so that it could experience the joy of being found. And now the pretending is over. Not because you achieved something, because you exhausted the pretense. You wore it out. You used it up. And what remains? This quiet, this stillness, this strange and tender openness. This is not the reward for passing the test. This is what was always underneath the test. This is what you are when you are not trying to be anything. Stay here, not forever. Just for now, just for this breath. Let the silence after this sentence be the practice. Let the space between this ending and whatever you do next be the integration. You do not need to do anything with what you have heard. You do not need to apply it or memorize it or share it before you forget. It is already in you. It was always in you. The words were just the vibration that helped you remember. If what you felt during this was recognition rather than learning, if something in you said yes before your mind could evaluate whether to agree, then you are exactly where I thought you were. And where you are is not a destination. It is a beginning. The first real beginning, maybe, after a long series of false starts. Stay with it. Let it breathe. Let it grow roots in the dark. And if you want to continue this, if you want to keep this thread alive in your awareness, do one thing. Subscribe to this channel. Not because I need the numbers, because the act of choosing to return is itself a form of the practice we have been describing. It is the conscious decision to keep your filter calibrated to this frequency, to keep noticing, to keep the gap open. That is all. That is everything. I will see you in the next one.